have somebody that's getting ready to speak to us who emanates joy. I met Scott Jackson a few weeks ago when he began coming to church here. And every time, he doesn't know this, but every time I saw you and you said hello, I felt such an emanation of joy and the invitation for it to multiply. And I think that's a real gift that he has, for sure. Somebody's cell phone is on. It's somebody trying to get through with a joyful message, I hope. Yeah, well, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Scott, and his soul will speak for itself as he shares with us today. He resides in Virginia Beach now, and he's pursuing a master's degree in transpersonal psychology with a focus on consciousness at Atlantic University. He's deeply involved with the Edgar Cayce organization, and he works and dedicates much of his time there. His ultimate aspiration is to transition into the field of cognitive science, further deepening his understanding of the human experience, nature of the mind, and eventually educating others of those ideas to inspire change in our world. Some of the things that we know or have found out about Scott are that he enjoys kindness, the company of others, and especially family, friends, sports, traveling, and adventuring outdoors. He's always active. He played soccer and lacrosse when he was growing up, and he surfed. He liked to surf. And we have a lot of surfers around here who spread joy. He happens to be one of them. So let's give him a warm fellowship welcome and make our hearts and minds ready to receive his message. Come on up, Scott.
Hello. Very excited to be here. When I first came to the fellowship, I had an idea that I'd be speaking here eventually, just wasn't sure exactly when, but I'm happy it's happening now. This is a very interesting feeling that's going through me right now. This is the most energized I've definitely felt in a long time. As I've been practicing in my spiritual journey too, I've been becoming more sensitive to these sort of energies and these sort of feelings. And right now it's like really up there. I'm really, really highly elevated. It's a very interesting feeling. But I always knew I wanted to do this. I always knew I wanted to talk, speak publicly. My parents are here today. My mom is a teacher. She teaches public school education. And my dad is a communications major, and he speaks publicly as well. So it speaks very true to me and what I want to do with what my parents chose to do in their lives as well. But the story goes, how I first came here is what I want to start with. So my parents one morning said they wanted to go to church. I myself had not been to church in about 10 years, and I wanted to find my own church or something that fits me a little bit better. So I looked up on Google Maps, something related to Buddhism or Taoism. Those were the two sort of philosophies that I was really into at the time. And what came up was the fellowship. And it was listed as an interfaith church, and that really was enough for me to get some consideration and show up. So I came a little bit early. I talked to Bruce in the back over there. I grilled him a little bit about the church himself, his own spiritualism and his own understanding and awakening. But he informed me after we were talking, as I told him that I was very interested in the field of consciousness and really trying to understand what it means, that day our guest speaker was going to be Neil Helm, who himself was going to speak on consciousness. And this was my first time hearing anything like this. So that was a really interesting moment. At the end of the conversation, I went up to Neil and Bruce, and I asked them a very simple question. What does it mean to be enlightened, and how do I become enlightened myself? And they both referred me to the ARE. So I go to the ARE that night, that Sunday. Nothing was open. Really nothing cool happened. I kind of just went home. And then I go back a month later in June for the members conference. Members Congress. I had no clue this was going on at the ARE. This was sort of a spring of the moment, just happened. I met so many people there. I snuck in on a couple lectures from guest speakers. I even became an official member of the ARE as well. And I even met a lovely prayer and study group coordinator. And I gave her my number, but she never texted me back. But after that, it was very obvious that this was very synchronistic. This was the direction that I was going to go through and go with. Beforehand, I only really, probably 2 years ago, when I had what I would consider my soul awakening, I really kind of just came to the conclusion that I wanted to help the world, but I didn't necessarily know how. I knew it had to relate somehow to soul and explaining and understanding soul to other people. My personal background was scientific materialism. There's no room really for the soul in that sort of interpretation, but we do have a lot of room for energy. And we really do like quantum physics as well. And it was the day that I kind of really understood a lot of the quantum physics concepts that I really did kind of believe that there had to be something larger, something above the matter, something greater than material, which we call spirit. So now, since then I've been studying through philosophy, ancient wisdom, through Hinduism, Buddhism, and Taoism, psychology. I got really into Jungian psychology as well, which is very soul-oriented. I really expanded my thoughts and blew up there, and had come here and found this, which I'm so grateful for. Now, I'm going to give a little bit of a talk today about this book right here called The Map of Consciousness. This is going to be a personal consciousness-based model. It's going to look at the inner person model, how we sort of see that, and we expand it from the lower levels to the higher levels. I would say through my studies of consciousness, it is much more than just the human being. I take the panpsychic or cosmic psychic approach, which would say that the entire field itself is in itself consciousness. This podium right here is aware as a collection of atoms that is supposed to appear as a podium, and therefore it is. That's how I like to view sort of consciousness in a greater stance. But in the map itself, we're really going to focus on the person, our feelings, and how we go from the lower levels to the higher. Also in this, I want to talk about another concept, which is going to be the three minds, which is a very Taoist belief. Basically, let me see if I can't find the page. If we can get this image, if anyone can kind of see this, it's going to be a human body, and we're going to have a center of consciousness, which we're going to call the lower, or really the stomach, this sort of solar plexus area. We're going to have the middle, which is going to be more related to the heart and the throat and the will of the person. And then we're going to have the brain, the mind, or the sort of cosmic aspect, the crown as well. And those are going to be the three main sort of concepts. So with the three minds, what we do start with is we'll start with the upper mind, which is the brain. This is going to be what has our conscious awareness. This is what is sort of looking over and observing everything at all times. As we move down to the heart, the middle center, this is going to be the true center of consciousness. This is where our real purpose, our will, our goal, our desires, where the soul really lies. It comes from here and expresses out through that sort of way. And then in the lower mind, it's going to be the real center of awareness. If you sort of hold operations of consciousness in this sort of center right here, you can see a lot of different sort of feelings and things. I would imagine a lot of us here are deep meditators, have a lot of practice with that. You can even see here if you breathe from your heart, you have a different sense of spatial awareness or field-based awareness when you breathe from your stomach versus you breathe from your heart and your lungs, and then also when you're breathing strictly from the nose itself. It's just different forms of awareness and different forms of interpretation and how the sort of field plays out from there. So now I also want to talk about this concept, which is going to be power versus force. This is going to be more of the dualistic aspect and going to relate more to the brain and the mind, which is where I'm going to start transitioning the rest of this talk to. So power signifies the capacity to act or influence through inherent strengths and is often associated with power and positive change in leadership, while force refers to the direct push or pull, often implying a sort of cohesion or domination effect. It's also more negative in connotation, but force itself does not have to be negative. It's just the outside sort of appearances on the inside sort of body. Essentially, power is about the ability to achieve goals through influence, while force is about imposing control through direct actions. Power comes from within. It's based on personal qualities like integrity and charisma. It can inspire and motivate others to act, and it is associated with positive change and long-term impact as well. And force will be like an external pressure. As I said, it can lead to resistance or resentment where you're fighting back forces or moving against forces in many ways. And it may result in short-term gains, but will be destructive in the long term. If we look sort of at the government level or sort of geopolitically, we can see a lot of cases where force is causing a lot of harm to the people and to the earth itself, while aspects of power are maybe more so spiritual and higher above and wouldn't be using sort of forms of force. They would be influencing from within and inspiring us to create better and more positive change. So for me, I already said that I think consciousness is sort of the panpsychic model. It is everything. I also sort of take the test that there is a bodily level of consciousness for each individual person. At birth, we are all born with a specific level or number of consciousness. It's anywhere from this scale that I use in the map of consciousness, from 1 to 1,000 on a logarithmic scale. You can have 1,000 at the highest level. Real avatars that have touched that would be Buddha, Krishna, or Jesus. Those are the three main ones that have ever touched the true highest scale, and that would lead to higher spiritual awakening and different levels in the next plane of existence where they would be living their lives or living their conscious experience, because they would no longer be the people that walk this plane. In the middle of this, we get to courage. Let me actually start with the levels itself. So at the bottom, at 20, we're going to start with shame. Shame is the lowest form of consciousness. It sort of coincides with humiliation, feeling miserable, despising, and you sort of have an elimination of your process. You don't even want to do anything. You're kind of stuck. There's no moving forward. You're only trying to think how to move backwards. Next, moving up to 30, we have guilt, which will go into blame. We will think of like evil in this sense. It is vindictive and it is destructive. Guilt is when instead of looking at yourself, you're looking outside and you start attacking things instead of sort of taking responsibility or looking within yourself as well. At 50, we have apathy, which would be like despair, hopelessness, condemning, and addictions as well sort of fall into this level too. So you just kind of don't believe there's anything you can do. You're looking at the world and you think there's nothing possible. There's nothing that can happen. We're going to move up higher to grief, which is at 75. This is going to come to regret. You feel sort of tragic, disdainful. You really just can't get too much with grief. You're kind of just stuck in the same sort of spots. You're looking backwards on yourself instead of moving forward. Again, these are all lower level ones as well. As we get higher, you can see the sort of real change that occurs, especially once we get to 200, which would be courage. At 100, we have fear. This is anxiety. It's frightening. It's withdrawal. You really sort of hold within yourself and don't do anything. Desire, which is a real next sort of jump, I would say, but not necessarily a positive jump. You get to 125, which will have craving, which it can lead to disappointment. It's when you want something so much that you're disappointed when you don't get it. That is what true desire in a consciousness level sort of comes from. You're also very much denying sort of results with desire when it doesn't go your way, and you're kind of enslaved by your ideas and your thoughts as well. Next, we go to 150, which is anger. This is hate. You're very agnostic in many ways. You kind of just would be negative or be just like spiteful towards something instead of playing it through or seeing it out. You can also have a vengeful or very aggressive sort of take on life as well. We're going to move to what is right before 200, which is 175, pride. Pride, interestingly enough, if you know anything about Lucifer, he is the first to fall and he is the sin of pride, which I always thought was an interesting connection here because this is the one below taking courage, which is the first step to enlightenment. So interesting, that is the first jump in the lower levels itself. Pride is very demanding, it's indifferent, and you have sort of this inflation within the process. You're promoting this sort of ego and this aspect of self without really getting anywhere. Then we have now courage, which is going to be the first sort of jump into what we would call the reason and integrity of your sort of consciousness levels. Courage at 200, we have affirmation. We believe things are feasible. They can be done. There's not any of this looking back on it as if it's impossible or it's undoable. It's something we can challenge and start to begin. We really think it's permitting and very much empowerment comes from courage as well. Next, we're going to move to 250, which is neutrality. This, interestingly enough, is the position that most of our household pets actually play at. Your dog or cat will probably play at around 240 to 250, which means neutrally or on the greater scale, they're much more positive than many of us are, which is very cool. So they're very trusting, they're very satisfactory, they're enabling, and they will also be able to release the sort of negativity within themselves when you have this neutrality. You're not holding on to anything, you're just kind of letting it move through you. Moving up to 310, we have willingness. This is more so optimism, hopefulness, inspiring, and intention. These are some really big jumps to get you to the next steps. We have acceptance right above that, which would be like forgiveness and merciful transcendence. That's going to be at 350. Then we get to reason, which is 400, which would be understanding, meaningful, wise, and then abstractions as well. These sort of understandings that there is a possible process that goes through and we can move somewhere else. Now this is the big spiritual paradigm. After you make it through 400 and you get to the 500 level, you would now be considered a spiritual player in the game, if that makes sense. You can now start attaining what would be the next levels, which are love, joy, peace, and finally enlightenment. So love at 500, we have sort of reverence, being, lovingness, and revelation. These are sort of the aspects that come with it. With joy at 540, we have sincerity, completeness, oneness, and transfiguration. At peace at 600, we'll have bliss, perfectness, all-being, and illumination. And finally, enlightenment, which is 700 to 1,000. It's a pretty big scale, actually, which means there's a lot of sort of leeway with it. Everything is ineffable. It is self. It is pure consciousness. There is nothing but this. And that's just kind of the view that you take with that. Interestingly enough, when this book was written, most human beings were below the 200 level. In fact, 85% of society was below 200%, so below courage. They were not even touching the positive paradigms of life. Now, also interesting is that one person at the level of love, which is 500, is enough power within the paradigm or within the scales of humanity to shift over 750,000 people, which really, I think, emphasizes the importance of our own personal growth and our own spiritual growth for us and the world around us. I have had some conversations where people maybe more so criticize those that were, secluded themselves in the mountains and really worked on their spiritual growth and on things like that. But I was always trying to explain to them that there is a serious energy shift in the paradigm that if without the people, dedicating themselves to greater enlightenment and greater spiritual growth, this world would be a lot worse off, and we wouldn't even be able to see it. But there's also this other aspect, this dualistic concept of enlightenment, I would say, where it's either to seclude yourself and become that, or to live in the action within the karma and try and lift people up with you. It's to try and dance with them in the sort of spiral of life as we try to shoot up and forward, which me personally, I'm gonna try and play the game with as much resistance as possible. So I do want to compare this to a couple scientific concepts. First, I want to use the photoelectric effect. This is a physics concept where sort of every time light hits a semiconductive area, which would be like electrons or photons, energy is produced. That means that like every time the sun hits us, we are producing energy ourselves. While productive energy is touching us, we are also producing energy out. Outside of the sun, we are also producing light from our own body, so we don't need the sun necessarily to produce light. We ourselves, as light beings, are actually producing light at all times too. This light has many stages and frequencies. I kind of went through them just now, the ones that as a human being we can touch and bend through. But for the most part, according to my study, I would even just keep the sun into this. I would describe the sun at the level of 500, which is love. The sun would not be considered enlightenment, which is the highest level, but it is a paradigm of energy that produces onto us every single day that can bring us to this loving and higher energy. So everyone is born with a calibrated level. We all, through our lives, day by day, move up and down through it. Not everyone is stuck at a certain level. There are times where I could be hitting love, but then moving down to shame. It's very possible with everyone. And typically, people who hit the highest paradigms can have the biggest jump between the two. It's just very common in that sort of way. To me, there's a sort of a bioenergy field is the concept that I really like. Jerry actually gave me a good demonstration of it before with the sort of meridian centers and how that all works and how we can kind of use positive energy to keep our energy center strong by saying good things to people, while if we were to say negative things to people, our energy centers would become weak and we'd become weaker. That is 100% what I think is being described in this map of consciousness, but through a physical, biological level, through bioenergy and aspects like that. This study as well, through the map of consciousness, uses a human-based study, which is going to be due through the concepts of kinesiology and biology, where we are determining truth and falsehood based off a calibration within the self. So you would have to calibrate over 200, above courage, be living in that level, and then you could start being a test subject for these sort of operations. And it's aiming between the concept of truthfulness and falsehood. That's the only two paradigms that really exist. That is the dualism within the consciousness, truth or false. And just because something is false doesn't mean it's not true. It just means it's less true than what is true, if that makes sense. There is no necessary false concept. It's just what is true and what is not that. So I do want to share some words actually from the Tao just to kind of explain this a little bit better too. Basically, Taoist masters have described the three minds: the upper mind, the observing mind; the middle mind, which is the conscious mind; and the lower mind, which is the awareness mind. The upper mind does all the analytical activity and planning that we go through in our day-to-day, but it is clouded most times by negative emotions. This takes up about 80% of our body's energy, what is going on in our heads. And we can use a method, which is very much a meditation, to relax this mind and move the consciousness, our conscious awareness, from the head, the brain, down through the heart, and then into the stomach. This is the most energy-efficient way and place to keep your mind. You might have heard it described as the navel in the past, maybe as the abdomen, but that is the place where you want your conscious attention and your energy mostly focused if you want to be the most energy efficient as possible. When you're doing tasks, like trying to plan something out or do schoolwork or anything like that, or write a paper, who knows, you do want to sort of act in this brain method. But when you're just sitting down and listening and watching, you want to keep your consciousness in your stomach, where you can sort of feel all these other aspects. Western science has also discovered that there are nerve endings in the stomach and intestines that are related to emotional responses as well. So there is the calibration, as the map of consciousness said. These are all emotional feelings when you go from shame all the way to love, all through that level. In the stomach, it is where it's all sort of controlled. And it's really important that you keep your conscious attention here in this area and know when you're sort of feeling out of balance or out of whack. Now I want to talk a little bit about the heart-mind concept. This is a really deep and I think profound sort of concept within Buddhism, and it really focuses on the concept of enlightenment too, where you have your heart and your mind thinking as one. But inside of that, you are really just working from the heart. There is no actual mind. The heart itself is the mind. It is the consciousness. It is the energy. You can push it out below and above to the other energy centers, sure, but in this concept, the heart is all there is. There is only one path you can walk, and that is the path of heart. So what we have in the heart, we would call the inner voice, or the soft voice, the silent voice. It is the most scared spiritual vessel as well. Without this inner voice, God is not alive within us. The Tao is not present. The self is not active. We become disconnected and ruled by our mind and our earthly desires rather than our hearts. The heart expresses and characterizes the beauty, the meaning and strength of life, and sometimes, while it is silent, other times it is immensely powerful and loud. Often we turn a deaf ear to this inner voice, to abide by it or give it credence. We choose instead to rely on the external world or external authority and disciplines to define our life with something meaningful, leaving us with confusion and distortion in our life's true meaning. The heart is power and the mind is force, and they work together interconnectedly, but also totally separate. So in closing, this wasn't going to be too long, but my goal is to finish my degree at Atlantic University, get my, thank you, my master's in transpersonal psychology with a focus in consciousness, and I really do want to figure out more aspects within cognitive science. Though the mind, I understand, is separate from the heart, I think it is the mind as a builder and as a mechanism, and how at least society is currently using it, I think needs to be studied and understood a lot more. I think from here, I would really like to dig deeper into more philosophy and the history of more so spirituality and culturalism within that as well. There's really a lot of aspects that I think were really understood well in the past that have been sort of lost through time to where we are now. And I want to sort of build and understand the sort of map of what goes on then so we can see it as it is now. Another thing that I'm actually really interested in, and much more interested than, sort of psychology in some sort of way, is metaphysics. I am obsessed with creating models and maps of consciousness and the world itself. I like to build ideas within sort of multiple dimensions. I love multiple dimensional theories. I like looking at, multiple different sort of subjects within this field. Kabbalah is a really big one that I've been looking into right now. They have a 10-dimensional interpretation. String theory would take you to 10 or 11 as well, interestingly. And then superstring theory would take you up to like 26 or 27. So there's a lot of dimensions at least already mapped out in some sort of way that I myself am trying to make connections and plug it into for what we're seeing right now. Because the idea is that as above, so below, in this third dimension, all the higher dimensions are touching us, as well as all the lower dimensions are being influenced by us and influencing us in the same sort of way. I really like to think of it as a subject of light, where light is being projected from the highest, moving all the way down to the lowest, and like a mirror, this is where we get the duality, is being reflected up and bouncing back and forth until you keep moving it forward, and you keep building more and more dimensions of different sizes, different scales, and different properties as well. So that's really what I want to get into more, especially once I finish my master's and get more to my PhD, which would be cognitive science, is to figure out how these sort of conscious dimensions and other aspects of them really fit in and work. But to me, it's just all kind of light and vibrations. I think that's the real simplest way to sort of put it all. But obviously, it's much more complex and real than that, which is why it's extremely profound in the world of consciousness. I guess this is just sort of a philosophical interpretation I like to take, which is the way of Zen. Zen Buddhism is really the sort of method that I like to take. And we really want to create a dance between the metaphysical and the ordinary. My goal isn't to become some spiritual guru master who sits on top of the mountain or can provide outstanding insights and create extreme healing just by my touch. It's more so to seem like a normal person while also being able to touch these extremely complex concepts that really do exist and sort of helping to ground it into this dimension. The highest kind of Buddha is just an ordinary person. That's really what it is. And I would also say that I lost my train of thought. But essentially, a quote from Plato, which I'm going to end with right now, is that love is the interpreter and mediator between gods and men. Thank you.